Joining me tonight to discuss the proliferation of ghost guns and the regulations is Rick Ector, a certified NRA firearms trainer and owner of Rick's Firearm Academy, as well as Sherry Gay-Dagnogo, a Detroit school board member and former state representative. Thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you for having me on.
So let's start with the basics. This is something people have been hearing about for a few years now, but more and more lately. Sherry, what is the argument for why ghost guns should be regulated?
So first and foremost, anything that is untraceable puts our lives more at stake. ATF in 2021 was able to recover over 19,000 of these guns that don't have serial numbers on them, untraceable, and people can sit in their homes and order them from their computer like they're shopping on Amazon. And is that what we want when we come together and advance a bipartisan Safer Communities Act after some tragedy happens? And then now we're going to now start relaxing those rules and allow for, the Wild Wild West to take place. We want to make sure that we're able to continue building on the Safer Communities Act by addressing universal background check, red flag laws. And so certainly something like this, you would think common sense would say it's unacceptable.
And yet, Rick, I have a feeling you're going to disagree. What is the argument for why they shouldn't be regulated?
They shouldn't be regulated because we're already over-regulating what we feel is a constitutional right to keep and bear a firearm. It wasn't too long ago I was here with Sherry, and we were debating some of the gun laws that, the state of Michigan was hell-bent on enacting. Whether we're talking about red flag laws, universal registration, and background
How do you register something with no
here's
number?
The thing, Sherry, let me continue,
go
Sherry.
ahead.
And as I mentioned then, and it's coming true today, that when you give the anti-gunners just a little bit of gun control, they always inevitably will come back. They will not stop their thirst for regulation of firearms. It grows unabated, and we have to continue to beat them back. Yes, we suffered from the gun rights proponents' view. We suffered some losses, and they have won their gun control, and they said, just give us this little bit of gun control, and we're going to be okay. No, they're not. They're insatiable, and they will not be satisfied until we reduce to rocks and sticks to defend ourselves against criminals and to defend our homes.
I want to push back on the slippery slope argument a little bit. Is it a good faith argument? That aside, let's say this is the only regulation. So barring any future slippery slopes.
We're going to pretend they didn't get all this gun control.
Well, I want to talk about the specific issue
Okay.
at hand, which is ghost guns, and what really is the argument. I mean, you are a Firearms Academy owner. You are subject to a number of regulations. There are rules you have to follow when you're instructing other people. If you were to sell a gun, there are rules that have to be followed. So why should this be any different? Why should people be able to just buy a gun that doesn't have a serial number and cannot be traced?
Well, we've always had the ability legally to manufacture our own firearm. It's just a question of where do you place the line. I can get the requisite parts, get the requisite machinery, get these coordinate measurement machines, and I can cut out a gun and make it functional and operate it. There's nothing absolutely wrong with it, and it has been legal for years. The question then becomes, back to my slippery slope argument, my opponent here is endeavoring to push. You give them a little bit of gun control, they inevitably come back to the trough.
Rick, this is not about control, it's about accountability.
Well, there is accountability.
There is no accountability.
There are laws against murder, and yes, they're still illegal. There's laws against using a firearm inappropriately. There's laws against raping and pillaging. They're there. You want more laws on top of laws. We already have enough existing regulations. We just need them enforced. And what I would like your people in Lansing to do is to ensure that our local law enforcement have the resources.
Cars in this country with VIN numbers, computers with serial numbers. Are you suggesting the lives of 50,000 people in 1 year whose lives were taken away from gun violence we're going to say to law enforcement, who is already understaffed and heavily burdened with trying to solve these cases and address the unjust killing of people at the hand of firearms, that we are now going to allow for guns with no serial numbers, so we don't have no way of checking where these guns came from, who sold them. So what about the laws? I know that you're against this, but holding manufacturers accountable as well, and making sure that you're not selling guns to children. And so if you're sitting on the other end of a computer with a serial number, ordering a gun that does not have a serial number, and you very well may be a child, who's holding that child accountable? I mean, so we gotta be honest here, Rick. There's certain things that are partisan lines will be drawn, and they will never, merge together. But there are instances in where you got two justices, Justice Roberts and Justice Barrett, who voted with the liberal justices in making sure that we now establish and maintain some control and accountability with ensuring that these ghost guns are not able to pillage in our community.
You're reading way too much into what they ruled. They ruled to merely kick it back to the court and have them resolve some procedural issues.
This will be dragged out.
This thing is going to go on for a while. Look, come on, Sherry. Sherry, I let you talk.
They did not support.
And I didn't want you to interrupt me. And I'm responding to your speech that you gave. And then you're interrupting me.
But you didn't answer any of my questions.
Let me get there. You talked about a litany of stuff.
50,000 deaths.
Okay, well,
let me just interrupt. I guess my question.
Those 50,000 deaths, how many of those were unfortunately due to people who had some psychological, emotional issues and suicides? You want to lump suicides into the whole
Sherry,
thing.
it is a fair point. They have been involved in many crimes, as you mentioned, more than 19,000 in 2021. They have been turning up at crime scenes across the country. This is true. But what do you say to those who say it's a Band-Aid on a much bigger, much more complex issue that wouldn't really turn the tide against gun violence?
You're absolutely right. And when we continue to have these tug-of-war fights over things that put the lives of people first, and you say it's not, I'm reading too much into it, but I say that I think that Justice Roberts and Barrett took the right step in voting with judges who were trying to make sure that we establish accountability. Is it enough? No, it's not enough. But we're continuing to work every day to try to legislate a myriad of challenges that exist in our community, and violence is on the uptick. With gun violence is on the uptick, and we know that that's factual. And so why is it there always pushback and trying to make sure that our communities are safe? Do we have to wait for another school shooting to occur for people to have the level of empathy that they should in putting legislation in place that does not take away your constitutional right to carry, but make sure that we are safe? We have accountability. We have ways to trace these guns back to the manufacturers, and that we don't have the Wild Wild West ordering them from their laptops.
Okay, the Wild Wild West argument and this whole thing about kids and guns. Look, we have over 20,000 gun laws on the books. There's more in sight. Enacting even more gun laws on top of the gun laws that we just enacted in the state of Michigan. Unprecedented, red flag laws, mandatory storage, universal registration, and now you want this so-called ghost gun legislation. At the end of the day, there is no law that you can enact that's going to make bad people do right and do good things. There is no way to remove the hate and the desire for evil that exists in the hearts of human beings.
I agree with you there.
Here's the thing.
I agree with you there.
Sherry, you went on for a while. Let me
I'm going to have to hit timeout on everything here. We're going to take a quick break, but the conversation will continue after the break. Stay with us. I don't know if there's been a better time to start a brand new news operation.
The newsroom was pretty much starting from scratch.
It's fresh, it's innovative.
Lots of energy, lots of passionate reporters.
Knowing what we're starting here puts so much joy in my heart.
We have reporters who are embedded in these communities.
We are part of the neighborhood. Our newsroom is part of your neighborhood.
Telling the stories that otherwise nobody would know about. Now, AJ, you went to the downtown boxing gym and you really got to see how this gym is impacting kids' lives.
Yeah, Chris, as soon as I walked in the building, it was very uplifting.
It's a boxing gym, but it's more than boxing. You know, we do homework. We help them with the SAT. When it comes to the weather, it's forecasting what's going to fall on your driveway, when is it going to happen, and how might it actually affect your day-to-day life.
Hundreds of people continue to call in reporting problems throughout the county.
Cleanup crews working all throughout Metro Detroit. Get them down and get them cleaned up. Local news to me means we're in your community, we're telling stories that matter to you, that affect you.
Well, we're rethinking the way local news is done in the 21st century and how to tell the most important stories in a compelling way.
Local news is all about letting people know what's happening in their community.
We're here to listen and actually hear what you're saying, and we're putting together a newscast that will show that.
I want to tell those people's stories because it's needed. Detroit is ready. Get ready, because here we come.
You're watching CBS News Detroit.
Welcome back. Yesterday, a bill that would ban ghost guns was reintroduced in Washington. The Guns and Untraceable Firearms Act aims to close the statutory loopholes that allow criminals and extremists to bypass background checks. One of the bill's sponsors, Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut, says ghost guns are a growing problem across the country.
Anybody who buys a gun has to do it from a licensed seller. The gun has a serial number so that it can be traced, and the manufacturer has to be licensed. When it comes to ghost guns, none of it is true. Ghost guns are sold in parts, often in a kit, without serial numbers. They are unserialized and therefore untraceable when they become crime guns. They are sold by manufacturers who are unlicensed. They're unscreened for their integrity. And there are no background checks. None. Zero. No background check. They can be assembled on a kitchen table. They can be put together with a 3D printer. The frame and the receiver can be sent, mailed separately without serial numbers, and then put together in the backyard or on a kitchen table.
Still with us tonight to discuss this issue are Ector and Sherry Gay-Dagnogo. So, Rick, my next question is for you. You've made it very clear. We understand the fear for gun owners and the rights of individuals when it comes to different firearms regulations, but why not apply some regulations to the manufacturers before the guns or the parts ever even make their way into individuals' hands?
Well, you know, it's still regulation, and here's the thing. We're talking about the right to keep bear firearms, and whether you go directly after the firearms or whether you start going after individual components, again, now we're going down that slope where they figure any path will get them to their destination, which is stricter controls on firearms and the ability for law-abiding citizens to defend themselves. At the end of the day, there are people out here who really do some bad things, but here's the thing. There is no way to stop them. There's no way to prevent them from doing things. The last time that we were on talking about this subject, you know, there are all these inputs that go into violence. We're going to the society at large. What are we teaching people in schools? The breakdowns in family, you know, the economy. I mean, this creates this perfect storm in which, yes, in a free society, we do have violence. How do we reduce violence? Why do we always make an end zone run towards depriving people of their right to keep and bear a firearm? I didn't commit some atrocious act. I shouldn't have my ability to own a firearm be diminished.
But is that the same thing as your right to have a firearm that's not been registered and no one knows where it came from?
Well, let's look at it in practical terms. We talk about we're getting hung up on whether a gun is registered or not. Of all the guns that are on the street, many times they are stolen because law-abiding citizens like me can't can't carry them, so we put them in our cars and they get broken into and stolen, and then we report it stolen, and then there's a gun on the street and it's being used to commit a crime. Tracing that gun, having it licensed and having it on some list somewhere is not going to prevent that from happening. Bad guys do bad things with guns, many of them stolen, and whether you have a special list of who owns what guns, it buys you absolutely nothing.
Sherry, it's been said many times there are more guns in this country than people, and there are already too many. No regulation could really reel them in. It wouldn't really be possible to collect and melt down all the guns, as some have suggested. Is that potentially the same thing with these ghost guns? As we noted, 19,000 were seized at crime scenes in 2021. That was over a 10-fold increase in 5 years. Is this already too big a problem to legislate?
It's a huge problem to legislate, but you know, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. And I think it's important that while we know that one law won't change the trajectory of violence in this country, we have to look at a myriad of ways that we can solve that. And I just stand on the side of law enforcement that is tasked with addressing the crime in our communities, working to keep us safe, and having some measurable way to identify weapons that were used at the scene of a crime. And so when someone's life is taken away, we have over 50,000 lives taken annually, and families are trying to have cases solved, and we're looking at law enforcement to help do that. How do we now say it's okay to simply allow these guns to be on the street with no way to trace them? And Rick, you pointed out, being a law-abiding citizen and having a weapon in your car that was potentially stolen. Why report it if there is no way to record a number or have a way to identify it? We're simply saying having these guns with no way to trace them, no way to identify them is wrong, and they shouldn't be on the streets. We know bad people do bad things, but those of us who are tasked with trying to maintain order and safety in our communities, in our schools, I serve on Detroit School Board. Do you think I want to see children from our school having the ability to go online knowing that they can order a weapon that you just put together in your basement at home? No. So this is something that we have to put laws in place to maintain safety. One and done won't work, but we must continue to work together to try and solve the crisis of violence in our community. And you're absolutely right. Mental health, you know, background checks, making sure we provide people the services and the psychological services that are necessary, addressing depression, addressing poverty, access to jobs, business loans, a myriad of things that need to be done in this country. But saying all these things in absence of addressing weapons that are on the streets without serial numbers, I mean, that argument is ludicrous. Again, to try and push forward that that's a way of taking away your right. It's not.
Again, you're at the trough. You've got your gun control you wanted. You got your universal background checks. You got your safe storage law. You got your red flag law. And you're back at the trough saying, look, Rick, it's not enough. You know why it's not enough? Because it doesn't work. Restricting the rights of good law-abiding citizens from keeping and bearing a firearm is guaranteed by the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. That is not the answer. The answer to making people safe is making it easier for people to have access to firearms.
Rick,
here in the city of Detroit, you call the police, they try to get there, they can't because they're busy, because the budget doesn't allow for the cops we need.
We're going to make their job even harder.
My question for you, Rick, in fairness, isn't the reason some of those things don't fully work, isn't it because the states have different laws? There isn't federal legislation. So you mentioned red flag laws and safe storage. In Michigan, that's not the law next door or to
It's not.
Our south.
As a matter of fact, each of these individual states should obey the U.S. Constitution, specifically the Second Amendment. We shouldn't have all of these infringements. You know, looking at the Supreme Court now, it seems to have a pro-gun majority. Eventually, these cases will make their way up to the Supreme Court, and eventually the Second Amendment will prevail unless we decide to do things the right way. If you can convince 35, 36, 37 states to agree with you, you can have your gun control. But until then, the Second Amendment is no different than the First, which is the reason why we have the Second Amendment. The First Amendment is that we have the right to say what we want, when we want, and not have to face any official reprisals from the government to punish us for going against the so-called king. There is nothing wrong with people owning firearms to protect themselves and to protect their communities.
Rick. You're on the wrong argument. So you would think you would think legitimate gun manufacturers would have a problem with any fly-by-night ghost gun that is being created God knows where with no oversight.
We don't convict GM, Ford, and Fiat Chrysler for drunk drivers. What's up with people? A person owns a legal product. It's not illegal.
You have the red herring. No, you do, because you're misleading
Let's
people.
pause here. Talking about law-abiding citizens, we've brought this up a lot. It always comes up in any of these conversations. Presumably, the vast majority of gun owners are law-abiding citizens. But Rick, what good reason does any law-abiding citizen have to seek out a gun that is specifically untraceable? Is the point not to evade detection?
Well, the point is that you can actually manufacture your own firearm if you have the requisite equipment and machinery at home to do so. It is currently the law. It has been the law. And the thing is that all of a sudden, some bad guys are doing bad things with some firearms that don't have a serial number on it.
I don't know if it's sudden. The gun violence issue.
Yeah, bad people have been doing bad things for a very long time. My thing is, yes, law enforcement, they do have their concerns and they do have their issues. One is being adequately staffed and having appropriate manpower. But see, they can't get everywhere. And why are we restricting the rights of law-abiding citizens to have those firearms and to protect them? And these firearms that people are making at home and don't have serial numbers, they're doing it within the auspices of the law. They should be left alone and be able to defend themselves.
Even if that makes it more difficult for law enforcement to do their job.
Well, freedom over everything. We have a right to communicate, First Amendment, freedom of expression. We have a Second Amendment right to protect our home, to protect our country, and protect the state if necessary. No, safety, I eschew safety. I'll protect myself. The Supreme Court itself has rendered in at least one decision that it's not the role of the police or the government to protect you. That is your job. Many people want to shirk it and want to throw red flag laws like we have to do something. No, you don't have to do anything. It is your right to protect yourself. It is your right to protect your home. It is your right to protect your family. That's the way it has been. That's the way the Supreme Court has decided. That's the way it shall be.
Sherry, do you think the framers of the Constitution could have comprehended a concept like ghost guns?
Well, the Constitution is a living document. It is ever evolving, and it's up to the interpretation of our Supreme Court justices. And as I stated previously at the beginning of this segment, I believe that they made the right decision in making sure that we're still able to have a measure of accountability. So, you know, as time moves forward, as innovation takes place, as the World Wide Web now is at our fingertips, you know, I just don't want to live in a country, a state where people are able to order weapons through mail order, even from overseas, Rick. You know, and so this is something that we have to take into accountability.
Even happening.
Oh, Rick, if they're coming through the mail, you don't know where they're coming from. Do you work for ATF? Come on, Rick. I mean,
you work for UPS?
No. All right, well, we could obviously talk about this all night, probably all year long, and we still may not come to an agreement here, but we do appreciate your time. This is Sherry Gay-Dagnogo and Rick Ector. We appreciate your insight. Again, these regulations are not a done deal. There will be some appeals, and we will hear much more about this in the coming months.